Hi, I'm Bob Tabor with www.learnvisualstudio.net, and I just wanted to take this lesson and cover some of the most basic input controls that we haven't already covered up to this point. We're going to need some of these input controls for future projects. Also, I just want to do a review of all the controls eventually, and so we'll get to that. We're going to cover 7 in rapid fire in this lesson. So you see that I've created a new project, Controls Example Part 1, and I've really done nothing to it just yet. I'm going to drag and drop an image that should be included with the download associated with this lesson. I'm just going to drag and drop it from my desktop into my Assets folder so you can see it now appear here. Alright, and we're going to need that in just a little bit. So I'm going to copy and paste most of the code for this lesson just because there's so much of it. And there's really 3 things that I want to learn about each control. First of all, how do I display it on screen? Secondly, how do I handle the major events that it will emit, whether it be a tapped or a selection changed, whatever the case might be. And then third, how do I retrieve the value out of that control? The current selection, whatever has been typed in, whatever has been checked or unchecked, things of that nature. Okay. So the first input control that we want to look at is the checkbox. Very simple yes/no control. As you can see, we create a new checkbox, and I set the content to a label that will be displayed by default to the right of that square, that checkbox. The user will tap it to check it or tap it to uncheck it. And so we have a tapped event that we can handle, and inside of this what I want to do is just display in the label below it or the text block below it whether the checkbox is currently checked or not. Now there's also a checked event, however it only fires once and then it never fires again, and that's not what we want. We want to handle every time that particular control has been touched. So you can see when I check it or uncheck it, I get the isCheck property equal true or false. Great. Alright, we're off to a great start. Alright, the next thing that I want to look at is a radio button, which is similar to a checkbox. However, it will allow you to add multiple potential values, each grouped together by a group name. So all the radio buttons that belong together, you have to give it the same group name. You can have 2 groups of radio buttons, and the selections will be unique within each of those groups. So here again, I'm setting the content property. It'll be a label off to the right hand side of the actual radio button itself. And radio buttons are not really buttons, they're more like check boxes. So that's an odd name, but I guess because it's a button like a button on a shirt, it's circular. So let's see, the other thing that we want to do, we can handle the checked event again. I'm not sure we're going to get the results we want. Here, I'm going to go ahead and go along with that. So I'll hit F12 on my keyboard, and here we will set the radio button text block below it to the text, and we'll just use this ternary operator. We'll either say yes or no. So let's go ahead and run the application now. And so we'll select yes or no, or yes or no. Okay? So that's how, and we could add as many radio buttons as we want, but it typically only works good with 4 or 5 selections at most. If you have more than that, then you'll probably want to move on to a different type of control for input. Alright, so we've covered those 2. Let's move on to the next one and look at a combo box. And a combo box will allow you to create a number of combo box items, each with their own value. So let's go ahead and format this a little bit. Got messed up in the paste. Alright, so here we have a combo box, and we're handling a selection changed event. So whenever somebody makes a different selection in the combo box, we want to handle that and then take whatever the new selection was and display that in the label below or in the text block below. You can see that we create a number of individual text box items. They'll show up in the drop-down list, and we can even say, hey, this one should be selected. In fact, I'm going to move this one just to prove this. We'll move it to the last one. Will be selected by default. Alright, and then in this selection changed event here, I want to handle that. And I'm going to go ahead and paste in the code. It's a little bit tricky, honestly. The way that we retrieve the value is that we're going to use the the sender that was passed in order to get a reference to the combo box itself, and then to get access to the selected item that was chosen from the combo box. Then we're going to choose combo.selected item, and we're going to cast that to a combo box item, and only then can we retrieve the content of that combo box item and display that in the text block below. So let's go ahead and run the application. And here you can see 6th was chosen because we set the isSelected property to true for that. But when I make different selections, you can see how they show up here in the label to the right hand side. So that's how we get access to the selected item. And this is great because you can choose a number of, you can have a long list of items, unlike a radio button. However, they're all hidden, and it might not be completely obvious to the user that there are many other options. In this case, you might want to choose a list box instead. Now, the list box is going to be a pretty important control when we go forward when we're creating our hamburger navigation. There's a bunch of different ways that we can create that hamburger navigation that's popular in Windows 10. I choose the list box for reasons that I'll demonstrate in an upcoming lesson. To kind of follow up on a promise that I made earlier. However, let's go ahead and take a look. It too has a selection changed event. Let's go ahead and handle that. And what makes the list box a little bit different than the other items like the radio and the combo box is that several items could be selected. So take a look here that I changed the selection mode, which is by default a single item, and I changed it to multiple. So by you could select multiples, and what I want to do is use this link query against all of the list box items for those items that were where the selected property is true, and then I want to grab out just the content property of those selected items, put them in an array. In an array of strings, and then I'm going to call string.join to concatenate them all together for display into the text block below. So let's go ahead and run this, and you can see what I mean by all that. All right, so I'll select the first one, the second, the third. I'll get rid of the second one. I'll get rid of the first one. I'll add the second one. So you can see how that works. Now, what we'll use it for when we actually do use it in an upcoming lesson, we'll change the selection mode. It'll just be single selection. But one of the features that I like about it is that once you make a selection, it actually will keep that selection highlighted, which is one of the things that we noted about the hamburger navigation style on the Money app, the Sports app, the ones that are built into Windows 10. Okay, we'll come back to Listbox someday soon here. Now let's move on. I want to show you the image control, because it too will be used in an upcoming exercise. And the image control will do just like what it says. It'll display an image. However, there is this interesting property. First of all, you set the source. And in this case, the source is going to be relative to the root of our project. So we're going to look in the assets folder for a logo.png. We could also supply it a location across the internet or some other folder in our application. The thing that I wanted to kind of point out, which is interesting here, is the stretch property. And there's a couple different options, and I'll go through each of them here as we run the application over and over. So first of all, the stretch property is none, which means we're not going to stretch the property to fit the available space. There's no stretching at all. We're just going to put it in its original size, which, as you can see, is quite large. Next, we're going to change the stretch property to fill, and let's see what that does for us. So the fill selection will say, okay, it's a 250 by 50 250 wide by 50 tall area, so fill it up to the best that you can. So it'll stretch that image out of shape and make it distorted, but it will fill up the entire area. And then the next one that we'll look at is uniform, and that will make sure that it's not distorted and it's actually resized correctly so that it fits in the available area. But there's a lot of extra area here that is unused off to the right-hand side. And finally, uniform to fill is the last option. It's going to look a lot like none. that we looked at earlier. However, it's going to keep the proportions correct. It's just going to stretch out the proportions to fit the available space. And again, this might not be so obvious in this example. However, if you have a different size boundary and a different type of image or size of image, you might see some change in how that looks. All right. So let's go ahead and move on from there to the toggle button. And the toggle button is just a stateful button. So you can click it on, you can click it off. There's also an option to make it a 3-state. So you can click it and give it no value, click it on, or click it off. And so I've set the is 3-state to true so that we can see it at work. Here I'm going to handle the my toggle button click event. And inside of here, I'm merely going to display whether the toggle button is on or off, if it's checked or unchecked. And let's go ahead and run it. I see the premium option. I turn it to true. I click it again, which sets the is checked to null essentially. And then I check it again and it's false. So that's 3-state. We can turn it to 2-state and it'll be simply 1 click on, 1 click off. All right. And then the last one that we're going to look at here is similar to that, except it's called the toggle switch. And the toggle switch allows us to toggle between 2 states. And we see this control used often in the settings panel in Windows 10. And what you can do that's interesting is actually set a content area for what should be displayed whenever the toggle is in an off position or an on position. You can also handle other events, but this will be primarily how it's used to display the current state of the toggle. So let's go ahead and run that application one more time. And you can see I've set it to I'm off right now. I can turn it on and I'm on. I'm off, I'm on. And I just use a simple text block, but if you got creative, you could do quite a bit with this. Okay, so that's all I wanted to cover in this lesson. Hopefully you're able to see for each of the controls that we covered how to display it. If we can, how do we handle the events that it will, how do we handle the events that it emits, or how do we set properties that are special to that particular control, and then also finally how to retrieve the current selected value out of that control. All right, so let's continue on. We're doing great. We'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you.